So the next item of the business this morning is the debate on the report titled Living Together in 21st Century Europe, follow-up to the report of the Group of Eminent Persons to the Council of Europe, presented by Mr. Toshev, and on behalf of the Political Affairs Committee with opinions presented by Ms. Kofer on behalf of the Social Health and Family Affairs Committee, Mr. Chop on behalf of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Population, and Mr. Flego on behalf of the Committee on Culture, Science and Education, and Ms. Kovacs on behalf of the Committee on Equal Opportunities for Women and Men. We will also hear a statement by our Secretary General, Mr. Torbjörn Jagland, and he will be speaking after the speeches on behalf of the political groups. I remind you that we have already agreed that we will interrupt the debate at noon, and the debate will resume this afternoon. I also remind you that we agreed on Monday to limit the speaking times today's debates to 3 minutes. I now call Mr. Toshev, our rapporteur. Mr. Toshev, you have 13 minutes in total. You can divide between presentation of the reports and to reply the debate. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Since the first moves towards unification of Europe, its founding fathers decided that it should be a multinational and multicultural union based on values. The European multicultural model, as then accepted, was more than merely a collection of diverse identities. It includes the national differences and specificities into a common will for shared future, common will for collective actions, and for establishment of supranational joint entities with fair multinational representation. This model incorporates the differences without erasing them. The 3 general pillars of United Europe are democracy, rule of law, and protection of human rights. However, this is not enough to describe the contemporary European model. This model incorporates also concrete solutions derived from the history and culture of each of its member states and unified in a common will for the future. I would like to recall also that when it was decided to build the United Europe without dividing lines during the Hague Congress of Europe in 1948, there were several empty seats symbolically reserved for the future member states from Central and Eastern Europe, which were not able then to attend this extraordinary event. At that time, the countries which were absent from the Hague Congress suffered from communist dictatorships and had fallen on the other side of the already erected Iron Curtain. After 1989 and the destruction of the Berlin Wall, the states were affiliated to the Council of Europe, many of them also to the European Union, and came to take the seats reserved for them in the European family. The changes after 1989 affected not only the Central and Eastern European states, but to a significant extent caused changes also in Western European countries. The cohesion and adaptation within reunited Europe is still in progress. Aware of our different cultures, we thought that the multicultural European model was a well-established, unquestioned and mutually accepted system which we have all strongly advocated. This is the way how we live together in Europe. However, a few months ago, the political leaders of Germany, Angela Merkel, of United Kingdom, David Cameron, and of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, have cast doubt about the success of multiculturalism using nearly identical expressions. Their statements caused serious concern in Europe with regards to the general issue on how to live together in the 21st century. Even before the statements of aforementioned leaders, the Council of Europe Secretary General asked an independent group of eminent persons to prepare a report on the challenges arising from the resurgence of intolerance and discrimination in Europe. The report of eminent persons is a timely measure. It assesses the risk, identifies their sources, and makes a series of proposals for living together in open European societies. The group highlights 8 specific risks to the Council of Europe values. Those risks are widespread intolerance, growing discrimination, especially against Roma and immigrants, rising support for xenophobic and populist parties, parallel societies, Islamic extremism, loss of democratic freedoms, presence of a population without rights, and the potential clash between religious freedom and freedom of expression. The report underlines some of the reasons behind the threat: insecurity arising from the old continent's financial crisis and sense of relative decline, distort perceptions of large-scale immigration, detrimental stereotypes of minorities in the media and public opinion, and a clear leadership deficit in shaping Europe's present and future. In the report of the Eminent Persons Groups, there are 17 strategic recommendations and many other specific proposals for action. On several issues, the group's findings corroborate positions already taken by the Assembly, while in some cases suggesting different ways of achieving similar goals. The challenge has been and still is to ensure implementation in a situation which the group correctly refers to as a crisis of leadership. I would like to underline that the promotion of all proposed measures cannot be imposed as a form of holistic approach of social engineering. It would be clearly unacceptable. The goals we pursue could be achieved only through dialogue, understanding, and mutual acceptance. That's why my report is proposing a recommendation as a first but not last reflection of the Assembly on the Group of Eminent Persons suggestions. My point here is that the Eminent Persons analysis provides a basis for further reflection on Europe's future, which should involve acting politicians, NGOs, trade unions, youth organizations, academics, as well as representatives of religions, the media, and local authorities from different backgrounds and countries. The general question before us today is, if the multicultural model is not working properly in some European states, what might be the solution? Assimilation, obviously, is not an option. We could all agree on this. Some people think that if the necessary laws are adopted and conditions provided, this could be the solution of the problem. But obviously, it is not enough. It is not the laws that form society. The society is the one that forms first citizenship, which in turn establishes freedom, and only then is the turn of the state to adopt laws. The cultivation of obedience to the law is part of European culture, but the other elements of this culture are equally important. Quid leges sine moribus vane proficiunt. In vain are the laws when there are no mores. This phrase, spoken by Horace more than 2,000 years ago, is still valid. In the Statute of the Council of Europe, signed in London on 5th of May 1949, the representatives of the founding member states reaffirmed their devotion to the spiritual and moral values which are the common heritage of their peoples and the true source of individual freedom, political liberty, and the rule of law, principles which form the basis of all genuine democracy. That's why education is of crucial importance for cultivation of values. Here I would like to remind you of already adopted in 1999 by the Committee of Ministers Declaration and Programme for Education for Democratic Citizenship, based on the rights and responsibilities of the citizens, and the Council of Europe's Charter on Education for Democratic Citizenship and Human Rights Education, adopted by the Committee of Ministers in 2010. Both of these documents are developing an understanding for the normality of the differences, something that is much more than tolerance. If the laws and conditions are not enough for real integration of newcomers and other marginalized groups, what should be done? According to me, the groups that cannot be integrated successfully into society need our active assistance to enjoy the provided opportunities. And in this interaction, they are also active participants. They are not an object, but a subject. People coming lawfully to live in a country should not be expected to leave elements of their identity behind, faith, language, culture, etc. However, they are expected to show willingness to integrate themselves into their new country's society, not only by learning its language, but also through gaining knowledge and understanding of the local culture, and they must respect democracy, human rights, including the rights of women, and rule of law. On the other hand, the communities of origin should not ostracize those who choose to change their faith or culture. We should build cultural bridges by encouraging the European citizens to familiarize themselves with and respect the culture, language, traditions, and history of immigrant groups. This active interaction we call the intercultural approach. This is not the first time that the Assembly has called for the implementation of this approach. In it, we see the solution of the existing problems. The intercultural approach implies an active interaction of the culturally different groups within society in order to develop the best model of living together. The Political Affairs Committee suggested that our Assembly should find ways to encourage politicians and elected representatives at all levels to speak out on the challenges raised at present by the threats to the European project and solidarity. We recommend also a reflection on the proposal for an annual forum against extremism, while keeping in mind the necessity for the Assembly to maintain its capacity for rapid reaction in the face of new disturbing developments. But here I would like to propose another name to be considered, different to the one proposed by the Eminent Persons Group, after which to name this initiative, which name could unite us in greater extent. Our committee has a number of recommendations to the Committee of Ministers, among which are launching a major campaign on living together along the lines of the two all different, all equal campaigns. We should suggest exploring the possibility of enhancing the role of the Council of Europe's Development Bank in integration projects in member states. I would like to stress that in this debate today, there is no room for confrontation or filibustering, but for sincere contribution to these very important problems. I sincerely hope that we could find a common position addressing this issue. As a rapporteur of the Political Affairs Committee, I invited the other 4 committees which must give an opinion to my report to contribute in advance with their ideas in the very initial stage of its preparation. And I'm grateful to them all that we have reached a large agreement on the text of the draft recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Toshev. You have 2 minutes and 45 seconds left to reply to debate. And I call Ms. One second, please. Yes, now I call Ms. Koffer, rapporteur of the Social, Health and Family Affairs Committee, to present the committee's report. Ms. Koffer, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the Committee on Social, Health and Family Affairs, I would like to welcome the Eminent Persons report. And I would like to start my intervention with a short quote from Commissioner Hammarberg, which was said in 2009, February, with regards to the economic crisis. But I think his words stand very as a guiding light for us to understand this report. The increase in unemployment will place a further burden on state budgets, less income and more expenditure, and the argument will be made that there is a little space for social assistance to match the growing needs. This conclusion is likely to cause tensions and perhaps even social unrest. There is a risk that xenophobia and other forms of intolerance will spread further and that minorities and migrants may become targets. Extremists might seek to exploit and provoke these tendencies. We have learned from bitter history that such forces may even threaten democracy itself. These words were said in 2009, and here in 2011 we are reading a report with the same conclusions and with the same warnings and making recommendations. So I think we can clearly say that this is the right time for Europe to take social rights very, very seriously. Commissioner Hammarberg pointed out a couple of times that the second generation of rights, social rights, are many times treated as poor cousins of civil and political rights. This report in front of us, and the committee welcomes that, highlights the importance of social rights taken seriously and the importance of providing access to social rights for all. Everybody who lives with us in Europe, regardless of their citizenship or status, and the report focuses on the ethnic dimensions mostly of living together with regards to minorities and irregular immigrants, and the committee welcomes this, as many times these people are living in extreme poverty, in a completely rightless state, invisibly in our societies, and they certainly need urgent assistance. However, we also like to say that we regard this report as a good starting point for a discussion. As we know, here in the Assembly, we have been talking about social rights and social inclusion on various occasions, and we have made resolutions and recommendations to the Committee of Ministers, which are in in harmony with the recommendations of the Living Together report. But we consider this as a good starting point for the Council of Europe to take seriously social rights and to widen and deepen the discussions and include other groups as well, and other social dimensions, for example, the living together of the different age groups or the different genders. We have two amendments which were unanimously carried by the committee, which you can find in our recommendations. One is regarding the responsibility of member states in providing access to social services for all, and the second one is taking the European Social Charter as a basis for the social services that we provide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Koffer. And now I call Mr. Chop, Chairperson of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Population, to present the committee's opinion. Mr. Chop, you have also 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, President. This indeed is the report of my colleague, Mr. Diaz Tejera, but he has had to go back to Spain for parliamentary business, so I'm introducing it. Can I first of all say that when Mr. Toshev introduced his report, he again misinterpreted the expression multiculturalism. And I would draw the attention of members of this Assembly to what I thought was a very wise introduction to this report, where it's made quite clear that the political leaders of Germany, the United Kingdom and France asserted that multiculturalism had failed, but the authors of this report decided not to use the term multiculturalism because they weren't sure what it meant, and they thought it confused more than clarified. And I hope that during the course of this debate we can follow that wise advice rather than misrepresenting what has been said. Can I also say that the Migration Committee has put forward a number of amendments, knowing that these amendments are going to be debated by the Political Affairs Committee this afternoon before we actually vote on them later. Perhaps I can draw attention to the first of those amendments, which is Amendment A, which would change the recommendation in paragraph 6 so that instead of talking about people coming lawfully to live in a country being expected to comply with the rules and laws and norms, it would apply to all people. Because we think that it's unrealistic and indeed counterproductive to suggest that those who arrive in a country unlawfully should have a different range of rules with which they should comply. So I hope that that can be sorted out by the acceptance of this amendment in due course. And we also think that Amendment D is very important because that really is calling on the follow-up to this report, because there's not much point in having this debate, having an address by the Secretary-General, and we congratulate him on the initiative of getting this report together, unless there is effective follow-up to the report. And so our Amendment D says that following the conference, which is referred to, an action-based agenda for the Council of Europe should be set during a ministerial session, and this should feed into any future Council of Europe summit of heads of state and government. So we believe that this report, if it's going to be worthwhile and taken seriously, needs to be followed up properly, and that we hope that that amendment will also find favour with the committee. But above all, we think it's a really good idea for members to look at this report in detail. There are lots of good stuff in it. I'm not saying we agree with every jot and comma, but certainly it's a really useful contribution to debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chop. Now I call Mr. Filego, rapporteur of the Committee on Culture, Science and Education, to present the committee's opinion. Mr. Filego, you have also 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. The challenge of living together is not new. Our Assembly has regularly addressed the problems that undermine the cohesion of our society, seeking to promote mutual respect. We know well that we want a society which bans any form of marginalization, a society in which everyone has the right to genuine opportunity to develop as a person whose dignity and identity are fully respected, a society in which everyone adheres wholeheartedly to the democracy and human rights and plays an active role in the common good. To build such a society should not be reduced to mere politics. And the policy design must encompass not only legal, but much more political, social, economic, and cultural factors. Therefore, the pan-European project for living together should strengthen political rights and democratic participation, reduce inequalities in the enjoyment of social, economic, and cultural rights, reinforce social cohesion, and foster cultural development. These elements are not sufficiently present in the Living Together report. Education, cultural cooperation, youth, and media policies must be enhanced in order to develop a new culture able to sustain the living together society. I wonder whether we can build a new culture of living together without improving our education system and combating the educational and cultural divide in our societies. Can we expect that respect of others, enjoyment of human rights, following the rule of law, promotion of diversity, broad-minded persons, and so on, would be practiced and would be able by uneducated people? Who will promote the Council of Europe values if our schools do not start with? How can we, a living together society, develop without fully involving the young generation in the process? Can we achieve better democracy and promote our common values without we work with the media much more than it is the case so far? Has anyone right to reduce instead to enlarge and to strengthen our strategic activities in education, culture, youth, sport, media? I am thankful to the Political Affairs Committee for having considered and adopted the amendments concerning these dimensions as well. Dear colleagues, building a living together European society is at the heart of the core mission of our organization, and we have to fight so that this building does not remain on the paper. The Council of Europe has a role to play, and we must urge the Committee of Ministers not to disregard it. The enhanced role of education, cultural cooperation, youth and media policies are crucial parts of the living together society, and that implies that these activities become the very basis of our priorities and, consequently, a trigger of the redefinition, at least of some elements, of the reform of intergovernmental bodies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I now call Ms. Kovas, rapporteur of the Committee on Equal Opportunities for Women and Men, to present the committee's opinion. You have also 3 minutes.
Thank you, distinguished Chairman. Dear colleagues, on behalf of the Committee on Equal Opportunities for Women and Men, I would like to support the views expressed in the report of the Political Affairs Committee. However, it is more than necessary to highlight that the Committee of Ministers should take carefully into account the different situation of women and men without minority groups by fully incorporating the dimension of gender mainstreaming. It is important to highlight the situation of women belonging to minorities because they are a minority in a minority and are most affected by exclusion. They are affected by marginalization and exclusion on several levels, since they belong to a group which is perceived as different because they are women and therefore disadvantaged by the lack of de facto gender equality in society, and because of the patriarchal mentality which is widespread in the minority groups to which they belong, which confines them to a stereotyped and subordinate role in relation to men. Compared to other women and to men from the same background, women from minority groups have, among all, a lower employment rate, lower salaries and/or worse working conditions, a lower level of education, a lower level of participation in public and political life, etc. They are also at greater risk of being victims of violence or trafficking, especially for the purposes of sexual exploitation. There should be a continuum between the enjoyment of human rights in the home where someone lives, in the community he or she belongs to, and in a society at large. In a word, women should be free from being beaten up, from being raped, from being subjected to child marriages, etc. They should be free to marry the person they choose, to work outside the house, to wear what they like. Diversity is not only here to stay, but to grow. Our committee is happy to see that Mr. Toshev has included in his text a recommendation asking that the Committee of Ministers fully integrate gender mainstreaming in the implementation of the recommendations of the Living Together report. Propose positive measures to Council of Europe member states to avoid women from minority groups being subjected to multiple discrimination and to promote their active participation in social, economic and political life, and promote the signature and ratification of the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence against Women and Domestic Violence, as well as our additional amendment to the introductory part of the preliminary recommendation to highlight the specific situation of exclusion experienced by women from minorities and the need to build up their potential bridging role between their communities and the society. Please keep in mind that human rights are universal. They are not bound to a region, nationality or a community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kovacs. And in the debate, I call first Mr. Lipinski to speak on behalf of EPP Group.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues. Et tout d'abord, je voudrais féliciter le rapporteur pour son excellent travail, qui, je l'espère bien, sera bien accueilli par toute notre Assemblée. Le rapport se réfère au document préparé par le groupe d'éminentes personnalités à la demande du secrétaire général du Conseil de l'Europe et intitulé « Vivre ensemble, concilier la diversité et la liberté dans l'Europe du XXIe siècle ». Ce document a été élaboré au temps où les dirigeants de trois grands pays européens, l'Allemagne, la Grande-Bretagne et la France, ont annoncé leurs incertitudes sur l'efficacité du multiculturalisme, bien qu'il ait été établi avant ces déclarations. L'Europe du XXIe siècle est exposée aux différentes et sérieuses menaces. La marginalisation et l'exclusion de différents groupes conduisent vers des attitudes extrémistes et forment un aliment pour les mouvements populistes et xénophobes. D'autre part, la situation où les différentes communautés vivent l'une à côté de l'autre, mais séparément, montre les faiblesses de la démocratie qui, malgré sa correction formelle, se restreint alors seulement à des procédures et aux aspects purement arithmétiques. La loi seule n'est pas donc suffisante pour résoudre ces problèmes. Leur solution exige l'approche interculturelle et l'interaction mutuelle des différents groupes au sein de la même société. L'unité de l'Europe est fondée sur sa diversité. Chaque communauté et chaque personne doit avoir le droit à conserver son identité religieuse, linguistique ou culturelle, mais en même temps doit respecter les lois de son pays d'accueil ou de résidence, connaître sa langue et comprendre sa culture. L'éducation est l'outil important dans la lutte contre les stéréotypes préjudiciables, mais il faut aussi engager dans cette lutte d'autres sujets et d'autres institutions. Les organisations religieuses, culturelles, les organisations de jeunesse, les ONG, les médias, etc. L'acquis du Conseil de l'Europe dans le domaine du dialogue interculturel et du respect et la compréhension mutuelle entre les peuples est énorme. Profitant de cet acquis, le rapporteur propose une série de points à recommander au comité des ministres. Ils sont largement acceptables. Leur adoption soulignerait des accomplissements du Conseil de l'Europe et contribuerait à améliorer la visibilité de notre organisation. Je voudrais donc, chers collègues, vous convaincre à appuyer ce projet de recommandation. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lipinski. Now I call Mr. Moria on behalf of the Social Democrats.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je le dis tout de suite, on aurait pu s'attendre à mieux du rapport du groupe d'éminentes personnalités sur le thème « Mieux vivre ensemble ». Car ce rapport, loin d'être un rapport politique, constitue une réflexion sur l'intolérance à travers les prismes de la sociologie, de la religion, de l'immigration. En cela, il pourrait constituer d'ailleurs un danger par sa mauvaise interprétation à l'extérieur, en considérant ce rapport comme une référence quant aux valeurs communes que nous défendons, a fortiori rédigé par des experts, comme on le dit, extérieurs au Conseil de l'Europe, il faut le souligner. Nous passerons sur le terme menace au singulier, car les inquiétudes de la société européenne sont bien évidemment aussi et surtout liées, en particulier pour les classes moyennes, aux crises financières, économiques, environnementales, la précarité de l'emploi et à une mondialisation non régulée dont le dogme réside dans l'austérité. L'Europe n'est qu'un marché économique aujourd'hui, et on ne tombe pas amoureux d'un marché économique, disait déjà Jacques Delors. Nos citoyens sont bien conscients que l'Europe reste un projet global fédérateur et se constitue d'une somme d'intérêts nationaux. Mais ce rapport a le mérite d'exister, et mis en perspective, il peut être à la base d'une réflexion, d'un travail à long terme de notre Assemblée, à savoir définir un lien social juste et cohérent européen et permettre une véritable identité européenne. En fait, à l'instar de la réalité américaine, il s'agit d'inventer le concept d'European Way of Life. En cela, le texte devient intéressant car il repositionne le multiculturalisme, sans le dire, et aborde une série de problèmes, même si de grands domaines, on l'a déjà dit, qui sont à la base de nos travaux sont oubliés, quoique quelque peu abordés mais pas développés, l'enseignement, l'éducation, la jeunesse, les médias, les problèmes politiques. C'est un rapport qui suscite le débat et doit nous permettre d'aller plus loin dans la réflexion et l'action, les deux bases de la politique, car la cohésion sociale ne se décrète pas. Elle se construit. Pour une Europe plus sociale, pour une économie plus juste, pour un plus grand souci de l'environnement, pour accroître la conscience de la diversité culturelle, pour plus de citoyenneté et de démocratie, car le dialogue, la tolérance, l'humanisme, pour promouvoir la solidarité, la justice et l'égalité sont les valeurs à développer afin de mieux vivre ensemble. C'est pourquoi je ne peux, ainsi que bon nombre de membres de mon groupe, souscrire au rapport de la commission politique et sur lequel je m'abstiendrai, car il y a dans ce rapport des termes qui posent problème. Ainsi, le concept de race, ce qui ne veut génétiquement rien dire, politiquement non plus. Ainsi, encourager les femmes à éduquer leurs enfants dans une culture de diversité. Bonjour l'égalité pour les femmes que l'on renvoie à leurs fourneaux. Ainsi, résoudre la crise démographique par la lutte contre l'avortement. Sans commentaire, si ce n'est pour dire le mépris pour tant d'années de lutte pour des femmes, pour leurs droits. Ainsi, les cultes et les groupes religieux mis à toutes les sauces, dont leur rôle prépondérant est pour le moins surdimensionné et amène parfois des contradictions dans le rapport, sans oublier qu'on occulte la laïcité. Je pourrais poursuivre. Bref, en ce mois de juin, qui est une période d'examen, je pense que ce rapport mérite non pas une cote d'exclusion, mais à tout le moins une seconde session.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murray, and Madame Brasseur, on behalf of ALDE Group, is next.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, Mesdames, Messieurs. Nos sociétés sont-elles à la dérive? La désolidarisation est-elle une réaction à la mondialisation? Est-ce que la nucléarisation des familles à composition très variable entraîne un manque, voire une absence de repères? Si oui, comment pallier ce manque? Peut-on parler de l'échec du multiculturalisme quand on sait que les sociétés européennes sont multiculturelles de par leur histoire? Ce sont les questions que nous devons nous poser au vu des développements sociaux, économiques et politiques dans nos pays. D'une part, nous assistons à une globalisation dans tous les domaines et comme réaction, nous constatons d'autre part un repli sur soi, se traduisant souvent par des tendances extrémistes ou voire populistes. Il faut féliciter le secrétaire général de son initiative, soutenue par la présidence turque, d'avoir chargé un groupe d'éminentes personnalités de la rédaction d'un rapport sur la conjugaison de la diversité et de la liberté. Et je voudrais également remercier les rapporteurs, le rapporteur et les rapporteurs pour avis pour leur contribution. Nous sommes tous conscients que le rapport du groupe ne constitue qu'une première étape, car nous sommes encore loin, très loin, d'être à même de tirer des conclusions. Pour moi, ce rapport ne peut être considéré que comme une première ébauche. Je dois l'avouer, je suis restée sur ma faim en lisant ce rapport. Mes attentes étaient certainement démesurées. Et à écouter les rapporteurs pour avis des différentes commissions, ils ont tous soutenu le rapport et ensuite ils ont dit « mais ». Quand je regarde M. Flégaud qui a parlé également de l'importance de l'éducation qui manque quand même cruellement dans ce rapport. Beaucoup des idées proposées dans le groupe des éminents experts se retrouvent déjà dans le livre blanc sur le dialogue interculturel Vivre ensemble dans l'égale dignité qui a été adopté en 2008. Le temps de parole dont nous disposons aujourd'hui dans ce débat ne suffit pas pour faire une analyse des propositions qui ont été faites. Et le dernier paragraphe du rapport proposé par M. Toshev, du projet de recommandation, demande justement de poursuivre la réflexion en associant le secrétaire général, le comité des ministres, les auteurs du rapport, ainsi que nos rapporteurs de l'Assemblée pour, et je cite, approfondir et élargir le débat sur le développement de nos sociétés multiculturelles. Et c'est pourquoi, au nom de l'ALDE, je peux dire que nous allons voter en faveur du rapport, mais uniquement sous cette prémisse, car il y a encore beaucoup à faire et nous continuons à prendre nos responsabilités pour donner notre soutien, pour trouver ensemble des solutions, pour vivre ensemble, mais je voudrais dire plus, pour bien vivre ensemble. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Madam Brasher. I call Earl of Dundee on behalf of EDG next.
I should like to join with others in congratulating Mr. Toshev for his very useful report, which we debate today. He identifies certain unattractive and corroding tendencies in Europe and encourages us to reduce and eliminate them. These include racist, anti-Semitic and xenophobic acts and attitudes. As he observes, against these and other manifestations of intolerance, our societies may be rather too indulgent. Mr. Toshev may well imply a distinction between two different contexts. The first is that of the 20th century, when the abuse of human rights followed directly from its wars, political systems of fascism and communism. On the other hand, the second context is formed by the recent years so far of our 21st century. Here we are fortunate. Human rights abuse no longer derives from European wars and political friction. Instead, it has reduced to an awkward aberration within a political consensus. Mr. Toshev's point, therefore, is that we should deal with it from the solid human rights consensus enjoyed among our Council of Europe's affiliation of 47 states. Taking the two contexts together, that of the 20th century may at least provide a service if it can give a constant warning. In this regard, I'm glad that last month the United Kingdom administration announced a government contribution of £2 million to the preservation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp to help ensure that the lessons of Auschwitz live on for generations to come. Yet before attempting to devise solutions to current problems, perhaps we should spend a moment reminding ourselves on how and why the background to human rights in Europe has so radically changed. A principal catalyst has, of course, been the success of Europe's political experiment. Firstly, that of our own organisation, the Council of Europe. As a result, states and citizens now stand before the European Court of Human Rights on an equal footing, a development which was inconceivable prior to 1950. Secondly, that of the European Union. For through subsidiarity and other means, and contrary to previous misconceptions, this has proved that the protection of the European citizen does not undermine the integrity of European states. Among proposed remedies, Mr. Toshev includes three essential expedients: the focused partnership of relevant institutions, such as that between politicians, NGOs, trade unions, the media, local authorities, and so on. Next, within school education, a greater emphasis upon teaching the skills of tolerance and good citizenship. Then, as also urged by the Council of Europe's 2005 Warsaw Declaration, within member states, the creation of sustainable communities where people want to live and work together now and in the future. On educating towards good citizenship, the United Kingdom has some constructive offerings. In particular, these include the Edinburgh International Award Scheme, first started in the 1950s, now adopted in a large number of states, and which instills community skills and responsibilities within school learning.
Le prochain orateur dans notre débat est M. Lecoq, au nom du groupe JUE.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Au nom du groupe, je souhaiterais présenter un certain nombre de remarques sur ce rapport après avoir écouté les résumés qu'en ont fait les différents rapporteurs. En effet, la question qui nous préoccupe réellement n'est pas tant quelle suite à donner au rapport, ce que nous faisons déjà au Conseil de l'Europe, mais plus prosaïquement quelle a été la portée réelle de ce rapport des experts. Et j'ai bien peur que la réponse ne soit négative, aucune plus-value, aucune valeur ajoutée, rien. Souvent, nous le résumons d'ailleurs par un inventaire à l'après-vert de tout ce qui préoccupe déjà l'ensemble des commissions de notre Conseil. Aussi ne sommes-nous pas sans nous demander pourquoi de si éminentes personnalités ont perdu du temps, consommé de l'argent peut-être du contribuable européen, pour ne rien dire. Combien a coûté ce rapport, combien de réunions inutiles ont été nécessaires pour aboutir à un consensus mou et stérile. Revenons sur l'élaboration du rapport lui-même. Pourquoi avoir demandé à des experts, qui pour la plupart sont d'anciens politiques, de faire un rapport sur comment vivre ensemble au XXIe siècle? Qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait, eux, d'abord, pour mieux vivre ensemble quand ils étaient aux affaires? Pourquoi avoir interrogé d'éminentes personnalités? Parce qu'elles allaient offrir une vision plus éclairée que celle du simple citoyen confronté dans son quotidien à la montée de l'intolérance, de la xénophobie, de la précarité, de la pauvreté. Qui sont les experts sur cette question? N'aurait-on pas dû plutôt s'adresser au préalable aux politiques que nous sommes, représentants des espaces territoriaux qui nous élisent, pour faire un rapport qui aurait pu proposer des avancées autrement plus concrètes, parce que justement nous sommes les représentants de la diversité des citoyens qui composent l'Europe d'aujourd'hui. Si ces personnes éminentes ont une spécificité dans un domaine de compétences particulier, pourquoi ne viennent-elles pas d'ailleurs à Strasbourg présenter elles-mêmes ce rapport? Pourquoi ne pas aller interroger les indignés madrilènes pour venir témoigner sur la difficulté du vivre ensemble dans une société qui ne fait pas la place qu'elle mérite aux jeunes? Pourquoi ne pas avoir posé les véritables questions qui sont à la source du vivre ensemble? La question du partage des responsabilités dans la crise financière, la question de la gouvernance économique imposée par une poignée de financiers aux États, la question du partage des richesses et de leur inégale répartition de plus en plus criante. La question aujourd'hui qui est posée n'est pas le constat. La question qui est posée, c'est qui aura le courage politique de proposer un autre référentiel? Pourquoi ne pas avoir mis en exergue le fait que la gouvernance financière a aujourd'hui remplacé la gouvernance politique, pourtant la seule légitime? Ne nous étonnons pas qu'aujourd'hui les peuples rejettent la classe politique sans faire de distinguo. Je souhaite terminer sur une note humoristique. À l'avenir, si le Conseil de l'Europe souhaite interroger un groupe d'éminents sages, le groupe de la GUE leur garantit sa pleine et entière disponibilité et précise qu'il le fera gratuitement. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Lecoq. And now I invite the Secretary General to address the Assembly on this report. You have the floor, Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have listened carefully to all the rapporteurs and intervention from the party groups, and I would like to say that I'm very thankful for the constructive approach that all of you have taken to this. I will explain why I think this is probably the most important issue that this organization is facing and that Europe is facing nowadays. But first I would like to say that I agree with Lord Hamilton that said that the wording of this should be that it is a report from a group of eminent persons to the Council of Europe, but not only that, it is to many other institutions in Europe as well, to the European Union, to the OSCE, to NGOs, to the whole European family, because we want to have to engage with all actors in Europe today, and I think that the Council of Europe should play a leading role here. If we are not able to do it, then we cannot be relevant. I will say a few words about that later, because this goes namely directly to the core issue, to the core mandate of the Council of Europe, namely to protecting human rights and live together on the basis of the European Convention on Human Rights. If we are not able to play a role here, we cannot play a role in any other issue, I would say. How was the birth of this group? Well, it started during the preparation of the Turkish chairmanship, because we saw that the debate about integration, immigration, became increasingly polarized in Europe. It has been going on for many years, actually. But now it is becoming even more polarized. And we also saw that important leaders which has been referred to here, said that multiculturalism has failed, and they warned against the development of parallel societies. So the Turkish Embassy and I, as Secretary General, said that we have to take this seriously. We have to have a response to this. Not only say that we agree or we disagree or accuse somebody, but we need to have a thorough debate on this important issue. And therefore, the Council of Europe had to play a role, an important and leading role in this debate. We agreed, therefore, that we needed an independent group to make a report to us how we could start a process and also how we could interact with other players on the European continent. And it was important to have an independent group. It was said by the representative from the Socialist group that this was a group outside the Council of Europe. Well, I think this is a misunderstanding of what the Council of Europe is. The Council of Europe is the organization for 700 million people, and all these persons in the group, of course, they belong to the Council of Europe because they are citizens on the European continent. So if we have the perception that Council of Europe is something internal and nobody else from the outside can come here and say, have a word, then, I mean, then it explains everything, why we are not listened to. I have to say it as clear as this. It was important to have an independent group, and it was important also to use this opportunity to get people that is being listened to as friends of the Council of Europe. And I would like to tell you one thing. I listened to Joschka Fischer when he presented this for 500 people in Berlin. I have never heard such a good explanation of what the role of the Council of Europe is in Europe today. I never heard it before from anybody else, explaining the important role of this organization. I listened to Timothy Garton Ash, who is a leading intellectual in Europe today. He's a member of this group. And he can get his article printed in all the big newspapers whenever he wants, and he does it. I listened to what he said in London. It was even better than Joschka Fischer, explaining what the Council of Europe is and overall in Europe. We have got really good new friends for the Council of Europe through this. It is important for our organization because we also have to bring it outside this house. We need to have good ambassadors for this organization. It was not by accident that I, on Monday, was invited to speak to 400 or 500 journalists in Bonn as a key speaker to talk about human rights and the Council of Europe. So, but I would like to say, the report is only a starting point for a process. This was pointed out by all the rapporteurs. We couldn't expect that we got a report that everybody says, hallelujah, this is very good, fine. This is our report. It is a starting point for a process. But the goal of this process should be to try to find a common ground, a more common ground, I would say, for how to master the increasing diversity that we have on the European continent. Either we continue like it is today to have a more polarized political debate, which is at the end of the day going to be quite dangerous because we know from the past, as was pointed out by the EDG group, we know from the past how dangerous it is when Europe is not able to deal with the fact that we are a continent of diversity. So either we try to find a common ground or we heading for more and more dangerous problems related to this. And that is why it was so important what the rapporteur Toshev said, namely that this can only be achieved through a dialogue, an inclusive dialogue. We cannot just make a decision and say that everything is fine. We need to have a dialogue where everybody can have a say. So therefore, this is a starting point. And all the governments, because this report has now been presented to the Committee of Ministers, so all the governments, they need to sit down and discuss this to have a position. And hopefully they will have an interaction with the national parliaments. And hopefully the national parliaments will try to be in interaction with the broader civil society. And I'm very glad that you have taken this very seriously. But it must also be a starting point for the Council of Europe. So I will try to facilitate a process which includes the Committee of Ministers and the Parliamentary Assembly, so that we, at the end of the day, can try to put something on the paper which is uniting as many as possible. I will come back to this, how important it is. There is one important signal in this report, namely that diversity is a fact of life in Europe today. Trying to do away with it will lead to disaster. If you don't accept diversity, then the conclusion is that somebody has to leave. We have tried that before. We have to not only live with diversity, but we should try to see to it that we can get the benefits from diversity. This is a very important signal from the group. Another very important signal from the group is that when you are coming to the European continent and settling here, you don't have the obligation to do away with your identity, whether it is cultural or religious. On the contrary, you have the right to keep your identity, but you have also an obligation to respect and live in accordance with the culture, the standards, and the values which are being accepted on the European continent. This is why I say that this is an opportunity for the Council of Europe. Because what is this group saying? In reality, it is that we have to strengthen our common values. We have to strengthen the instruments that is upholding these common values, namely the Convention on Human Rights and all the instruments that we have in the Council of Europe. Because diversity means, as I said, that we have the right to keep our own identity, but we also need to have something that holds us together. And what is common on the European continent today? It is the values and the standards enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights. So we must use this debate and this possibility to bring out to the entire continent how important the Convention is and this organization. Because you cannot warn against parallel societies and at the same time talking against the European Convention on Human Rights. It doesn't make sense. If you are afraid of development of parallel societies, then you have to strengthen what is holding us together so that we can avoid development of parallel societies. And that is the common values that we have in the European Convention on Human Rights. So it's an extraordinary opportunity for the Council of Europe to play a role on the European continent in, of course, interaction with the other important European players. And this is my last point, namely that if you look at European history after the Second World War, one can say that there has been two important historic processes that have shaped this continent. One is the economic integration that also have paved the way for political integration. And no doubt the European Union has been in the front seat in that process. But another equally important historic process on the European continent has been, driving force has been the quest for human rights, which has shaped the whole continent. I would say also reshaped the whole continent. When people climbed up on the Berlin Wall in 1989, it was for the quest of human rights, which reshaped the whole continent. It started a revolution on the whole continent. And now the same thing is happening in our neighborhood. So it's a telling example of the important force that human rights has been in history, and in particular after the Second World War. And this is why we built all the institutions that we have today. And this is why I firmly believe that we have a very important role to play on the European continent, because we are representing the most important transformative force in Europe and in the world today, namely the quest for human rights. And this is the basis for handling the diversity that we have on the European continent. And this is the main message from the group, namely we have to live with diversity, we have to benefit from it, and we have to find a common way to do it. And if you, well, talking about how Europe have developed, it is absolutely clear that it was done in a kind of common action, the main political forces, the main political ideologies on the European continent. Well, they competed in every nation state, but they came together to shape Europe. The socialists, the conservatives, the Christian Democrats, all these main political forces, they had one common goal, namely to create the Europe that we have today. And that is what we should try to do now, namely to unite the main political forces and ideologies on the European continent to find a common ground on how to live together in the 21st century, how to cope with this increasing diversity. It is equally important as it was to build the European institutions. So I call on all the main political forces to do this, come together and try to find a common ground so that we can avoid the increasing polarization of this debate, which is, at the end of the day, can be very, very dangerous. I thank you very much for the constructive approach that you have taken. This is a starting point for a process, and you have to play a key role in this process, together, of course, with the governments that are in the Committee of Ministers, and I welcome you in this important process for the Council of Europe. If we are not able to play a leading role here, nobody else can do it, because we are the only pan-European organization. And if we are not able to do it, then we are not relevant, because it goes to the core mandate of the Council of Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for your passionate contribution to this debate. Now I call la prochaine oratrice, Madame Marin de la France. S'il vous plaît, Madame.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mes chers collègues, je salue le travail remarquable de notre collègue Toshev. L'Assemblée parlementaire se doit de donner des suites au rapport du groupe d'éminentes personnalités, ce point de départ, comme le disait si justement notre secrétaire général. Il est difficile de ne pas être d'accord avec le rapport fait par le groupe d'éminentes personnalités, dans la mesure où nombre des propositions sont des résolutions prise par notre Assemblée, donc que nous avons votée. Cependant, cela ne signifie pas pour autant que notre rôle de parlementaire en tant que vigie de la démocratie ne nous amènera pas à avoir un point de vue critique et nuancé sur certaines des propositions évoquées par le rapport. Je souhaite en premier lieu poser une question de fond qui est probablement le reflet de ma sensibilité nationale. Contrairement aux préconisations du rapport, le Conseil constitutionnel français a censuré une disposition législative qui préconisait d'avoir recours aux statistiques ethniques afin de pouvoir mesurer, en construisant un outil statistique, les formes de discrimination que pourraient subir certaines minorités. Ce ne signifie pas pour autant que notre rôle de parlementaire en tant que vigie de la démocratie ne nous amènera pas à avoir un point de vue critique et nuancé sur certaines des propositions évoquées par le rapport. Je souhaite en premier lieu poser une question de fond qui est probablement le reflet de ma sensibilité nationale. Contrairement aux préconisations du rapport, le Conseil constitutionnel français a censuré une disposition législative qui préconisait d'avoir recours aux statistiques ethniques afin de pouvoir mesurer, en construisant un outil statistique, les formes de discrimination que pourraient subir certaines minorités du fait de leur religion et de leur ethnicité. La décision numéro 2007-557-DC du 15 novembre 2007, relative à la loi sur la maîtrise de l'immigration, l'intégration et l'asile, rappelle qu'établir des statistiques ethniques serait contraire à l'article 1er de la Constitution française, qui dispose notamment que la France est une république indivisible, laïque, démocratique et sociale. Elle assure l'égalité devant la loi de tous les citoyens, sans distinction d'origine, de race ou de religion. De ce fait, cet aspect du rapport ne me semble pas faire consensus, voire ouvrir une boîte de Pandore, car ce serait davantage mettre l'accent sur la différence que sur le principe d'égalité. Qu'est-ce que le bien vivre ensemble si ce n'est reconnaître l'égalité devant la loi de tous les citoyens, sans se soucier de leurs différences? Dès lors, le bien vivre ensemble, ce n'est pas uniquement promouvoir les différences, mais plutôt apprendre à les oublier de manière à mieux les transcender par le principe d'égalité. Dès lors, le bien vivre ensemble passe nécessairement par la mise en évidence des ressemblances plus que des différences, pour reprendre les mots d'Ernest Renan, par un vouloir vivre ensemble. Or, ce vouloir vivre ensemble qui repose sur la volonté politique ne repose en rien sur des caractères naturels comme les origines. Il est une construction culturelle et politique. À ce titre, il nous appartient à nous, parlementaires européens, de redonner foi au projet européen par la construction de cette volonté de vivre ensemble. C'est pourquoi l'une des erreurs du rapport réside dans le fait de proposer trop d'actions au risque de les diluer et de perdre la philosophie d'ensemble du rapport. À mon sens, il importe donc de cibler les actions du Conseil de l'Europe au cours des grandes thématiques sans les diluer. Je finirai sur une note optimiste en paraphrasant à nouveau Renan. Le bien vivre ensemble est un plébiscite de tous les jours. Ne l'oublions pas. Je vous remercie.
So, thank you very much. And now I would like to open the floor for Mr. Harangozo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, the report talks about important questions of political affairs and challenges of living together, but now I would rather focus on something what I missed from the solutions it provides. I fully agree with the statement of the high-level group saying Roma people are distinguished from the rest of the population by their social exclusion. Initiatives focusing on solidarity as well on social and regional cohesion are especially important. Vulnerable groups, especially Romas, are facing multidimensional problems through which poverty deepens and it takes up the form of exclusion and increasing segregation. Prolonged inactivity and long-term unemployment reduces the capacity of those affected to overcome their social exclusion and economic difficulties. Exclusion has a strong spatial character. Exclusion from the flow of economic and social development mostly appears spatially and is interrelated with territorial exclusion. Therefore, the access of vulnerable groups to work and services is lower. The living prospects of social groups are determined by their geographical location, regions, microregions concerned, and most generally by their living environment. The spatial determination of the risk of being excluded is therefore very strong. Segregation processes are clearly more visible in the cities than in the surrounding, less densely inhabited areas. The situation in rural areas affected by segregation is, however, even worse. Rural populations suffer from a very disadvantaged situation in the new member states of the European Union, where the economic transition has strengthened the inter-regional disparities. Based on these arguments above, the horizontal approaches are not sufficient to solve the problems of vulnerable groups. In order to tackle the situation of the vulnerable groups, like Romas, a territorial approach is needed, which would address the complexity of the problems locally in the concerned areas. There is a genuine need for micro-regional based approaches focusing on intra-regional disparities and on the most sensitive areas. If not, the polarization process can deepen, especially if the economic and social interventions will be concentrated around the dynamic centers and the excluded areas will further decline. When tackling this problem, greater emphasis should be laid on spatial planning and the integrated spatial development. I believe that the basis of growing extremism is the extreme differences between vulnerable and prosperous groups and territories. So we have to focus on the fight against these differences. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Madame Gauthier, s'il vous plaît. The floor is yours.
Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues, voici déjà plusieurs sessions que nous nous inquiétons de la montée du racisme, de la xénophobie, de l'intolérance religieuse et la persistance de nombreuses formes de discrimination dans nos sociétés. Le rapport du groupe d'éminentes personnalités arrive donc, je dirais, à prénommer pour accompagner notre réflexion dans ces domaines. Le XXe siècle a été pour l'Europe celui d'une longue quête de la liberté qui a trouvé une certaine forme d'accomplissement au début des années 90 avec la démocratisation des pays d'Europe centrale et orientale. Je souhaite que le XXIe soit pour les sociétés européennes celui de l'égalité, non seulement en droit mais aussi dans les faits, entre tous les citoyens. Les propositions faites dans ce rapport, qui visent à encourager un plus grand investissement des pouvoirs publics comme de la société civile dans la promotion du dialogue interculturel, vont dans la bonne direction. J'aimerais m'attarder cependant sur un point du rapport que l'on ne peut occulter et qui, pour la parlementaire de ce féminin que je suis, fait sens. Je veux parler de l'égalité homme-femme. Le bien-vivre ne peut se concevoir dans une société dans laquelle l'égalité entre les citoyens des deux sexes ne serait pas pleinement respectée. Nous évoquerons demain la question de la participation des femmes dans les instances de décision économique et sociale. Mais sans même aller plus loin, il y a encore beaucoup à faire en termes de reconnaissance des droits sociaux, d'égalité salariale, de conciliation de la vie professionnelle et familiale, de représentation dans la vie politique, d'abandon surtout des stéréotypes, de lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes. Dans ce domaine aussi, un engagement plus ferme des pouvoirs publics paraît nécessaire plus que jamais, et aussi une prise de conscience plus grande par les médias du rôle qu'ils sont susceptibles de jouer pour avoir un impact décisif. Je souhaiterais ajouter un mot particulier sur le sort des femmes immigrées. Comme le souligne à juste titre le rapport, elles sont généralement victimes d'une double peine, de par leur sexe et puis aussi leur origine. Notre Assemblée s'est déjà beaucoup penchée sur le sujet en adoptant des résolutions sur la question de leur intégration, des violences domestiques et d'esclavage domestique dont elles sont victimes ou de leur intégration sur le marché du travail. Dans quelques jours, nous allons donc retourner dans nos parlements respectifs. Faisons en sorte, chers collègues, de trouver un moyen de traduire ces résolutions en action, si ce n'est déjà fait, pour que la notion de vivre ensemble prenne toujours un sens positif au XXIe siècle et ne soit pas seulement synonyme de coexistence, mais bien d'acceptation de diversité.
Thank you, Madam. And now, Madam Magdalene. Yes, the floor is open for you.
Спасибо. Величайшие мыслители человечества всегда пытались ответить на три главные вопроса: кто мы, где наши корни и куда мы идем. Кажется, однажды, ответив на эти вопросы, можно было бы снять их с повестки дня, но меняющееся время заставляет, чтобы каждое поколение дало свой ответ на эти вечные вопросы. И эти ответы определяют как настоящее, так и будущее людей и народов. С точки зрения нашей большой европейской семьи, ответ на эти вопросы может быть обобщен в следующем. Что нужно людям для нормальной жизнедеятельности? В первую очередь мир. Для меня, как представителя Национального собрания Республики Армения, этот вопрос особенно важен, потому что как в последние 20 веков, так и теперь, к сожалению, человечество не нашло рецепта совместного сосуществования без войн и конфликтов. Сегодня в Европе нет войн, к счастью, но есть регионы, где существуют конфликты и опасности войн. Таким является и Кавказский регион в целом, и Южный Кавказ в частности, который по политическим, экономическим, историческим, территориальным, военным, стратегическим и тактическим причинам и по своему географическому положению является клубком проблем и полем интересов сверхдержав. Я глубоко убеждена, что вы хорошо знакомы со всеми этими проблемами и хочу указать на наипервейшую задачу – установления мира и стабильности, потому что замороженные конфликты похожи на вулканы, а жить вблизи вулканов не самое подходящее место для жизни. Прочный мир возможен только в том случае, когда конфликты разрешаются по принципу национального самоопределения. И такие прецеденты мы с вами, мир уже знает. Если поддержание универсальных прав и основных свобод человека есть общеевропейская ценность, то поддержание права нации, человеческого сообщества на национальное самоопределение и свободу тоже должно иметь приоритет. И я глубоко убеждена, что в 21 веке мы будем жить и развиваться в этом направлении. Мы живем в мире, где новые технологии развиваются с фантастической скоростью. Глобализация уменьшает мир и ускоряет все процессы. Я хочу обратиться только к одному вопросу в этом плане – идентичность малых наций и глобализация. Я думаю, что залог мощи и вечности нашей европейской семьи – это существование разных наций и народов. Мы все очень разные, и только вместе, дополняя друг друга, становимся совершенными. Такой взаимодополняющей, а не взаимоисключающей должна стать и политика, для чего большие и малые народы должны иметь равные права и перспективы. Нам всем нужен идеал, сформированный на основе правильной, проверенной, жизнеспособной и жизнеобеспечивающей системе ценностей. Спасибо.
Thank you, madam. And now, Madam Gafarova. The floor is open for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. In the 21st century, in the epoch of globalization and assimilation of national bounds, formation of coexistence culture is of great importance. Of course, coexistence drastically rejects discrimination and racism. Coexistence requires eliminate problems in this direction. In the period of global threats, terrorism, and tendencies of religious confrontation, especially when desire for coexistence requires careful and tactful approach, our current steps and future measures in this regard should not result in destroying our national, cultural, and moral values. In contrary, we have to jointly cooperate with sincerity, respect, love, and goodwill. We should preserve and protect common human values without forcibly imposing our faith and beliefs to others. I can proudly point out that my country, Azerbaijan, is a country where representatives of different religions and nations live peacefully and friendly. Nowadays, the Christian Jewish communities of Azerbaijan, alongside with Muslim community, which is the majority population, enjoys and exercises equal rights. Azerbaijanis, Russians, Jews, Georgians, Ukrainians, and others, irrespective of their nationality, generally all our citizens consider it their duty to live for the sake of common values and concerns. The representatives of different nations visiting Azerbaijan consider our country to be a sample in terms of tolerance and deem the model implemented in Azerbaijan as a progressive one. I believe that nowadays the ideal formula that will unite us is to achieve the development of mutual coexistence culture. Ladies and gentlemen, if we are talking about the coexistence, then we must not refrain from confession of problems and menaces hindering this process. At this point, I would like to draw particular attention to Armenian-Azerbaijani Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. The conflict lasting for 20 years within the boundaries of Europe is contradictory to generally human rights, international peace principles. Despite the ceasefire agreement reached in 1994 and commencement of negotiations, the conflict has not been settled yet. Since the first days of negotiations, Azerbaijan demonstrating sincerity in solution of the conflict, was supporting the just and compromising ways of solution, based on objective arguments and international law. However, I have to say that Armenia maneuvering was striving to protract negotiations, thus reducing to zero all values and international codes. Ladies and gentlemen, nowadays the only way to settle a number of global political, economic, humanitarian and social problems is strengthening our joint efforts, cooperation and contacts. I do believe that we can realize this in Europe, which is common space for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. And now, Mr. Haugley, sir, the floor is open.
Thank you, Mr. President. The subtitle of the document we're debating is Combining Diversity and Freedom. It summarizes the challenge well. Diversity is a given, individual freedom is not. I want to thank Mrs. Kovacs for her contribution, which correctly points out that minority women are particularly vulnerable. When historians in the future are going to write the history of Europe in our time, they will find that yes, European women enjoy greater freedom than women in past centuries. At the same time, they may also find that in the name of cultural tolerance, European societies came to accept a double standard for equality between men and women, one for men and most women, another for minority women. I read Living Together with great enthusiasm. It strikes a good balance between, on the one hand, recognizing that people should not be expected to abandon their cultural identity, and, on the other hand, setting out principles that need to form a common platform for all, values that are not relative, not up for negotiation, values that define our societies. Just as democracy is better than dictatorship, there are certain cultural values that, simply put, are better than others. Recognizing men and women as human beings of equal value is better than considering women inferior to men. Belief systems that allow for women to participate in society are better than those demanding that women remain isolated and invisible. The challenge to us as parliamentarians is to build a common platform and to make sure all enjoy the same human rights. Legal protection is important. However, having legal rights is not enough. In Norway, we have had laws against genital mutilation for some time. It is, however, still a practice that goes on. Our efforts need to go beyond passing laws. Education is important, as is dialogue, providing support to victims and other measures. Leadership starts by standing up for what we believe to be universal rights. Diversity is a strength. At the same time, the pattern of looking away from the injustices that minority women are victims of has to stop.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for fitting in time limits. Monsieur Fournier, floor is open for you, sir. S'il vous plaît.
Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues, le 11 mai dernier, le groupe d'éminentes personnalités du Conseil de l'Europe a donc rendu le rapport « Vivre ensemble au XXIe siècle » dont l'avait chargé le secrétaire général de notre organisation. L'ambition des rapporteurs est de définir des priorités stratégiques pour le Conseil de l'Europe en vue de mieux concilier liberté fondamentale et diversité. Le document pointe un certain nombre de risques pour l'avenir et de la cohésion sociale et de l'intégration au sein de nos États. La montée en puissance des partis populistes et xénophobes, l'émergence d'un islam radical, l'immigration irrégulière et ses conséquences apparaissent à ce titre comme de sérieuses menaces pour nos valeurs. Le risque d'un clash entre liberté de religion et liberté d'expression est également souligné. Les 17 recommandations du rapport insistent en conséquence sur la nécessité pour les sociétés européennes de mieux accepter leur diversité culturelle, considérée comme le fruit de migrations successives. C'est sur ce fondement, selon les rapporteurs, qu'une véritable égalité entre les citoyens pourra être instaurée. Cette conception généreuse doit toutefois être nuancée. Un certain nombre de chefs d'État et de gouvernement ont récemment reconnu l'échec du multiculturalisme et la nécessité de repenser l'intégration de nouvelles populations au sein de nos pays. En mettant en avant les problèmes qui se posent à nos démocraties, le rapport confirme, sans l'avouer, l'échec de notre mode d'accueil et la nécessité qui est la nôtre de trouver un équilibre entre droits accordés aux migrants réguliers et devoirs que toute installation dans un nouvel État suppose. Le vivre ensemble du XXIe siècle doit à ce titre prendre acte de la faiblesse du vivre ensemble du XXe siècle. Ainsi, la conciliation entre liberté et diversité ne doit pas se faire au détriment des principes et des valeurs qui nous réunissent ici. De fait, si, comme le recommandent les éminentes personnalités, nous devons accepter la diversité, je pense que la diversité doit également nous accepter, qu'il ne peut y avoir d'amélioration des droits sans une meilleure prise de conscience des devoirs qu'ils impliquent. Notre générosité ne peut perdurer si elle n'est pas corrélée à une certaine exigence. Nous ne devons pas nous oublier pour mieux accueillir. Les 10 premières années du siècle ont été marquées par l'émergence d'une nouvelle forme de guerre, l'hyperterrorisme, et une crise économique et financière sans précédent. Les deux phénomènes sont rattachés à des degrés divers, à la mondialisation et au concept de proximité que celle-ci contient. C'est dans ce contexte délicat, créateur de peur et de frustration pour partie légitime, que s'inscrivent les migrations actuelles. La mondialisation, qu'elle soit positive ou négative, invite avant tout les États à repenser leur identité, leur histoire nationale, leurs gestes à la lumière des nouveaux enjeux, quitte à devoir adapter leurs traditions politiques ou économiques, à réinventer un modèle sociétal. Le débat sur les conditions d'intégration de la diversité ne peut, in fine, avoir lieu qu'au terme de ce processus national de réflexion.
Merci, merci beaucoup, monsieur. Madame Christopherson, the floor is open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, the Group of Eminent Persons sums up Europe's main challenge in 10 words: living together, combining diversity and freedom in 21st century Europe. That simple, that difficult. One main risk pointed out in the report is the rising support for xenophobic and populist political parties. Europe knows too well what that might lead to. The report describes a link between growing intolerance, xenophobia, discrimination, religious conflict, parallel societies, extremism and loss of democratic freedoms. And even more important, they point out the lack of political leadership as a main contribution. As parliamentarians, we have to ask ourselves, are we about to repeat old mistakes? Are we that kind of politicians described, following the public opinion rather than leading it, whatever this might lead to? If not, we are supplied with 17 guiding principles for peaceful coexistence between people of different race, religion and culture. And I find guideline number 14 especially important. It reminds us that purely legal equality will not be enough to enable immigrants and minority groups to enjoy full equality and participation in society. Special measures have to be taken to avoid ethnical differences in living conditions. Ethnical differences is unfair, a waste of human resources, and may lead to social anxiety. In Norway, 3 governmental panels just delivered their reports. One analysed whether migration might challenge future welfare. The second presented 230 measures for improved integration. The third title, In the Waiting Room of Welfare Society, describes the situation in asylum reception centres. Despite different approaches, all panels reached the same conclusion. Welfare schemes should be reorganised from passive disbursement to qualifying measures, enabling migrants to take part in education, employment and civil society. Integration is about combining rights and duties. Given opportunities on an equal footing, immigrants have the same obligations as all others to participate in work and contribute to common welfare. That is what they want as well. Thus, enabling immigrants is a common interest. The European population is ageing. If we are going to maintain a high level of welfare, we will need even more immigrants in the near future. So, following the proposals for action in the Eminent Persons report will be a wise thing to do. Indeed, their list of many actors for change identifies several, but as politicians, we have a special obligation to be at the front line and take the lead in the further processes. Thank you.
Thank you for keeping time frame. And now, Mr. Kalmar, I would like to invite you. Sir, the floor is open.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues. In spite of the fact that several rapporteurs are from Central and Eastern Europe, and this is the case among the eminent persons too, the problems dealt in this document affect mostly Western Europe. After a very turbulent 20th century, the main problem of living together in Central and Eastern Europe is still mostly of ethnical type. We who live there still experience the persistence, even in some leading political groups, of ideas which come from the period of the Second World War. This is why, when speaking about ethnical autonomies or collective rights, some politicians become very suspicious and angry. Among the principles you state in the document, one says that immigrants should not be expected to renounce their faith, culture, or identity. If so, what about ethnic communities? Why does Europe assist to the assimilation attempts going on in certain countries? I would have expected from the eminent persons to formulate among their strategic recommendations the right of ethnic communities to self-determination, autonomy, or whatever is necessary in order to preserve their culture, language, traditions in a way that gives them future perspectives also. In order to reach this situation, the country in which they live and their kin state should work together to ensure the necessary conditions. Otherwise, many human values will be lost for Europe, as they were in many cases in the past. For instance, a few weeks ago, the government of Romania announced the intention to change the regional organization of the country. The Romanian authorities, when acceded the Council of Europe in 1993, committed themselves in a written declaration to, I quote, basing their policy regarding the protection of minorities on the principles laid down in Recommendation 1201. Article 5 of this document reads as follows, I quote, deliberate changes to the demographic composition of the region in which a national minority is settled to the detriment of that minority shall be prohibited. The intended change, if completed in this way, would lead to the forceful change of the democratic composition of the region. It would neglect the commitments of Romania to the Council of Europe. We must not forget that on our continent, borders have changed quite often throughout the centuries, without asking the concerned people, so that today it is impossible to draw ethnically pure borders. I think that within the frames given by the Council of Europe and the EU, it would be possible to deal successfully with these issues. The document we discuss now would have been a very good occasion for doing so, but it represents a very good base for continuing this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And now, Madame Zarabian, the floor is open. Merci, merci.
Chère Assemblée, chers rapporteurs, une chose est sûre, nous, citoyens d'Europe, devons apprendre à vivre ensemble en conciliant la diversité et la liberté dans l'Europe du XXIe siècle. À ce titre, je voudrais remercier les membres du groupe d'éminentes personnalités qui a vu les défis auxquels l'Europe est aujourd'hui confrontée. Donc, qu'est-ce qui nous empêche de vivre ensemble en paix? Je pense que les rapporteurs et les membres du groupe d'éminentes personnalités ont clairement répondu à cette question très simple et en même temps très compliquée. Ce sont la xénophobie, l'extrémisme, le racisme, l'intolérance religieuse et interculturelle. Je salue la proposition émise dans le rapport de réfléchir sur l'organisation d'un forum annuel contre l'extrémisme pour y discuter aussi des questions de xénophobie et d'intolérance. Je suis sûre que le groupe d'éminentes personnalités présidé par M. Joschka Fischer ne négligera pas une telle manifestation honteuse de la xénophobie comme la déclaration du Premier ministre turc qu'il expulsera les Arméniens habitant en Turquie. D'ailleurs, il y a 2 mois, dans cette même salle, Erdogan a qualifié la non-expulsion des Arméniens comme une bonne volonté. Je crois à la loyauté et l'honnêteté des personnes préoccupées des défis d'intolérance et de la discrimination en Europe. Certes, elles ont raison de parler de la nécessité d'approfondir le dialogue interculturel. Mais quand le monument symbolisant l'amitié arméno-turque a été démonté par l'ordre de Tayyip Erdogan, qu'il a décrit comme monstruosité, l'Europe et le Conseil de l'Europe ont gardé un silence absolu. Tandis que l'ancien maire de Kars, Naïf Ali Beylourou, a avoué d'après la presse que le démantèlement de la statue a eu lieu à la demande du président azerbaïdjanais. Voilà un exemple de tolérance interculturelle. Oui, le rapporteur a raison en attachant beaucoup d'importance aux problèmes d'intolérance dans la politique. Et dans ce contexte, je ne peux pas ne me rappeler la discrimination envers les Kurdes ayant posé leur candidature pendant les élections parlementaires en Turquie. Alors, l'Union européenne était obligée à réagir officiellement à cet incident. J'apprécie beaucoup l'initiative du secrétaire général du Conseil de l'Europe de créer un groupe d'éminentes personnalités. Et si le travail du groupe peut devenir un appel du bon sens aux leaders politiques de quelques pays du Conseil de l'Europe pour lesquels l'extrémisme, la xénophobie et la haine sont devenus une idéologie État, nous pourrons alors enregistrer un pas important au chemin de vivre ensemble en paix. Merci.
Merci, madame. Mr. Gross, Herr Gross, the floor is open.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, I wished I could have said also to the Council to the Secretary General that I liked the report of the eminent persons, because it's a clear showing that we need multiculturalism. It can't be avoided, but the multiculturalism is not a contradiction to integration based on participation. And in this sense, I also think, Mr. Kamal, that you had a misunderstanding when you said that is only for the West. I think the example you said with the Romanian government showed that when the Romanian government would have taken that seriously, they would have come to another conclusion. So it's for the East and then from the Western part of our Europe. And I think it's a clear plaidoyer for multiculturalism, which is not the same like Mr. Toshev wrote in his paragraph 31, where he tended more to the so-called leaders of the 3 big European countries who think that multiculturalism is for yesterday. But I also would have liked to listen to Mr. Fischer. Mr. Jagland praised Mr. Fischer that he spoke very well in Berlin. And because Mr. Fischer yesterday, in a very good article in the Süddeutsche Zeitung and in another journal last month, he showed exactly what also is missing in the Vice Person's report, namely the polity we need in Europe in order to realize what is seen as Patrick very nicely said, a real European way of life. And this polity can't be replaced by leadership or role models. I think that's a weakness. We need a transnational European polity, which was also, by the way, foreseen by our founding fathers, because the Human Rights Convention can only historically be understood when you understand it as a side effect of a bigger project of really building a European democracy. And when we would have such a European democracy, which enables us and every citizen to influence its own existence, we also would overcome what our 2 French colleagues so nicely said, that we should never forget that diversity does not mean a total inequality in the life chances. Because when the life chances are not fairly distributed, the diversity can't be accepted. And in this sense, a real multicultural, integrated society needs this common polity. We still have to add to the report, and that's why I'm also very happy that we have a follow-up and a common will to work together to add to this report what is missing, but what we need when we want to realize it really. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gross, for your essential remarks. I would like to invite Lord Boswell. The floor is open for you.
Thank you, President. I too would congratulate the rapporteur on this report and the eminent persons on their report, though we all understand this is work in progress. there is no magic silver bullet which is going to create conditions of paradise in which we all live in harmony with one another. And I am personally a little wary of overselling the proposition of, for example, an annual forum event on extremism, although there was a successful conference on anti-Semitism in London some years ago. I participated about. There's nothing wrong with that kind of focus, but we do need to understand that there is continuing work to do to underpin our resolution and the mechanisms for achieving it. We're rather in the position of the chicken. It's no good hatching, laying the egg and cackling about it and then going away and deserting it. We actually have to sit on it and hatch something from it. There are some proper actions at national and international level. That is the centre of our approach here through the Convention on Human Rights. What does that convention mean if it isn't about treating all people decently and on an equal basis? So too an entirely proper role for national discrimination and equality legislation. And I've worked long and hard on that in England, and we have some good experience from there. And there is a need for targeted public programmes reaching out to people who are excluded. But I would put to the gathering the essential issue is a change in sensitivity and consciousness. It's a change in our hearts. We're all in some respects a minority. I'm an Aston Villa supporter, not a Manchester United supporter or a Barcelona supporter. But I make the serious point that any maltreatment of minorities diminishes us, even if we are members of the majority. We need to stop demonising individuals, even if it's behind the back of our hand and very discreet rather than in public. We need to find every means of getting people, not just the social partners, but people who are perhaps excluded from work or from the political process, to listen to them. We need to set an example in our public statements and to make sure that the media do not fall to the lowest common denominator of what is legally permissible. We need constant exposure through the education system, and we need jobs to make sure people can find places. But I would just leave you with the thought, if there is one simple message, what we need to do in difficult times is, if I may say this, to talk rather less and to listen rather more to those whose voices demand to be heard.
Thank you very much, sir, for your remarks, and I would like to invite Lord Tomlinson. Sir, the floor is open.
Mr. President, I agree with Mr. Morio and Mr. Lecoq in finding this a somewhat disappointing report. A report that only has 6 meetings and yet relies on 6 pages of listed bibliography is inevitably going to be a report that is based more on scissors and paste than evidence, and I think that shows through this report. I regret that no recent migrant to our countries was deemed sufficiently eminent to qualify for a place on the Eminent Persons Group. Picking up on the point that Mr. Lord Boswell made, it would have been a lot better if we had the opportunity of hearing a bit more and talking to each other a bit less. I'll get all my regrets out of the way first. I regret that no member of the so-called Eminent Persons Group has deemed it possible to come and occupy one of those front benches to defend their report to us today. Perhaps it was that after we'd heard at the political committee from Mr. Martin Hirsch, when he discovered that the political committee was not a sufficiently compliant, docile or receptive audience, the others decided that absence was possibly their best choice. I take issue today with 2 things in the report that I want to address. There's more that I could, but time prevents it. I think in the part of the report talking about the crisis of leadership, there's a fairly substantial level of arrogance from the committee. It's a committee of largely retired politicians, and of course they all think that nobody is as good as they were, and the rest of them are, sociologists and journalists. And I urge you to look at that so-called crisis of leadership. I think it reflects a very substantial arrogance on their behalf. But the thing that I really want to look at is the question of multiculturalism. I remember when President Giscard opened the Convention on the Future of Europe, and he produced this great vision of our wide, multinational, multicultural Europe. And it suffered from the same deficiency as we have here, because I pointed out to President Giscard, as a member of the Convention on the Future of Europe, that this great multicultural Europe, in a room of 700-800 people, had got three faces that were visibly different. Three faces that could be identified as black. One was the British minister, Patricia, from Scotland, who was representing the British government. One was my wife, who was sat in the public gallery. And the third was the guy who was serving the tea. And that is a problem that we have to face, how to make those voices heard directly in our deliberations rather than just talk about them. And that's a deficiency that this report suffers from.
Sir, actually we still should think about time limits, with all my respect to your speeches. Monsieur Vareikis, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would speak in a little bit different mode than my the previous speaker. I think the Council of Europe, what we have here, it was the organization created in the 20th century. And it was created to fulfill our dreams, our visions in that time, to implement the human rights, the rule of law, and the related values. Generally, it was created by Europeans for Europeans. And I would like to say that in few decades, we Europeans, we declared ourselves spiritually, declared as a happy nations. We know everything. We know what human rights are, what rule of law is. But now, so we created so-called European model, but now we are in the 21st century, and it is a different century. 21st century has the things what lacked the 100 or even 50 years ago. We have globalization, we have postmodern society, we have multicultural society, though we don't understand really what it means. We have intolerance, xenophobia, and of course we have the crisis of leadership, because I think the new generation is a little bit different from old generation. So the question is, sounds simple, but the answer is not simple. So what to do with our European model, what we created in last century? To defend it, to say that there's nothing wrong and we are happy, to improve the model, to change it, or simply to abolish it, to look for something new. And I think the report is exactly about what we can do. Of course, the answer is positive. We are not abolishing European model, but answer is very clearly says that we have to improve, to think about new challenges and how can we face it. Of course, there are a lot of immigration, but I think immigration is not the only one. The main thing is really do the values of 20th century are values of 21st century. Because sometimes we are speaking too much about the economic integration, about the budgets, about money, but very little about our spiritual integration and what we are looking for. Here I agree with Mr. Tomlinson. We really lack a spiritual integration, the understanding what we really are. Without that understanding, we cannot live in 21st century. So I think the report is the first step, as the Secretary General said. We need to do more, to do more precise, and not to be afraid to say, well, sorry, some time ago we were wrong. Now we have to live in a little bit different society. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vareikis. And I would like to invite Mr. Santini.
Presidente e colleghi, se dovessi dare un titolo a questo dibattito, considerate le molte fonti e i molti rapporteur, mi verrebbe questo: elogio della diversità e del rispetto. Meglio ancora forse, elogio del rispetto della diversità. Diversità che è tutto il contrario di omologazione. L'omologazione è l'annullamento delle identità e portare tutti allo stesso livello, rinunciando quindi alle proprie radici. Non è questa la via per l'integrazione, si integrano cose diverse, non cose già uguali. E allora su questo campo mi viene in mente, fra le molte citazioni, la prima è quella di Jacques Delors, quando si congedò l'ultimo giorno davanti al Parlamento europeo dopo 10 anni di guida straordinaria della Commissione europea. Lasciò questo messaggio, questa eredità: ricordatevi, disse, che non ci sarà mai un popolo europeo, ma popoli diversi, uniti da un comune destino. Io credo sia una buona carta anche per noi per procedere in questo lavoro. Il comune destino nasce soprattutto dalla coesione. La coesione è l'anticamera dell'accoglienza, l'apertura delle frontiere, l'apertura dei cuori ai diversi, ad una società multiculturale, multirazziale, multireligiosa. E tutto questo parte appunto dal rispetto delle diversità, ma anche dalla conservazione dell'identità, se no appunto che coesione vi sarebbe? Ci vogliono volontà per il confronto, per l'integrazione. E tutto questo parte da un punto fermo: l'abolizione delle discriminazioni di genere, di razza, di religione, di cultura, di cittadinanza. Ma ancora è un'apertura questa che potrebbe interessare il nostro cammino comune. Il Consiglio d'Europa, si dice in questo multirapporto, è pronto ormai per avere orizzonti più avanzati. Ieri abbiamo aperto al Marocco e alla Tunisia una forma di partenariato. Perché no, si dice in questi testi, non pensare anche a qualche paese del centro Asia, qualche paese del centro e sud dell'Africa? Sono questi, ripeto, i nostri orizzonti. Per venire a un aspetto importante, la politica. Bisogna migliorare, è vero, il rapporto fra il cittadino e la politica. Diceva il collega Grosch che manca la politica. A volte, collega, c'è troppa politica ma fatta male, con i partiti che mortificano il ruolo del cittadino all'interno del mondo della politica. Occorre sostenere con convinzione le politiche per la famiglia, che è la cellula della società intera, con attenzione per gli anziani, per i giovani, per le donne. E occorre soprattutto garantire anche un'informazione corretta affinché il rapporto politica e cittadino non abbia delle mediazioni distorte. Ecco, tutto questo deve essere il motore di un'evoluzione di cui il Consiglio d'Europa deve farsi carico. Lo ha detto poco fa il nostro segretario generale Jagland, siamo solo all'inizio. Quindi buon lavoro a tutti, perché nessuno qui è tenuto a immaginare di non poter fare la propria parte.
Thank you, gracias. So, Madame Gutu from Moldova. Yes, Madame Gutu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mesdames et messieurs, je crois que nous sommes tous satisfaits du fait que le sujet du dialogue interculturel continue de rester au centre de l'attention de notre Assemblée parlementaire. Nous débattons aujourd'hui autour du rapport d'éminentes personnalités et autour du concept « vivre ensemble ». J'ai attentivement lu le rapport de M. Toshev. Je le félicite, lui, ainsi que toute l'équipe qui a élaboré ce rapport et le projet de recommandation, car dans ces documents, on mentionne plusieurs documents adoptés par le Conseil de l'Europe et notre Assemblée visant la problématique du dialogue interculturel. Le texte du rapport et du projet de recommandation abonde dans la notion de multiculturalisme. Et c'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, en Europe, ce concept est mis en cause par certaines personnalités politiques européennes et à mon avis la notion de multiculturalisme mérite d'être redéfinie aujourd'hui et de redimensionner, d'autant plus que le sujet du dialogue interculturel constitue un débat important lors des forums scientifiques et académiques. Une société peut être multiculturelle, mais ce n'est pas la garantie que les individus de la société sont pluriculturels eux aussi. Des 8 risques identifiés par les grandes personnalités se référant aux principes de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme, l'homme. Je voudrais m'arrêter sur le phénomène des sociétés parallèles. Malheureusement, ce phénomène existe en République de Moldavie et cela est motivé aussi par le fait que l'espace géopolitique de la République de Moldavie est un espace multiculturel compte tenu de la multitude de minorités ethniques qui y habitent. Après des années d'occupation soviétique, de dénationalisation, de migration forcée des populations, aujourd'hui en République de Moldavie, il existe deux sociétés parallèles. Une société qui, ce sont les Roumains moldaves, qui partagent les valeurs de la démocratie, qui s'orientent vers l'Europe, et l'autre qui rejette l'idée de l'intégration européenne. Les premiers sont plurilingues, tolérants, acceptent la culture et l'identité d'autrui. Les autres ne parlent qu'une seule langue, malheureusement, ne veulent pas étudier l'histoire du pays, et tout respect des lois en vigueur qu'on leur exige est considéré comme violation des droits, de leurs droits. Comment briser ce parallélisme culturel qui ne date pas d'hier? Comment faire disparaître le fossé immense qui a été creusé durant des siècles entre les deux parties de la société moldave? C'est une question qui tracasse non seulement mon petit pays. La société divisée de la République de Moldavie est un véritable fléau pour les citoyens de notre pays. Et c'est avec regret que je constate que l'intégration européenne ne constitue pas encore un projet accepté par tous les citoyens de la République de Moldavie, sans tenir compte de leur appartenance nationale ou de leur confession religieuse. En République de Moldavie, nous devons d'abord apprendre à vivre ensemble dans notre pays et ensuite, bien sûr, accéder à cet art et à cette harmonie de vivre ensemble au niveau de l'Europe. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you, Madam, for your deep insight view. I would like to invite Mr. Hield, and the floor is open, sir.
Mr. President, can I start by saying that I don't know a great deal about Moldova, but I do think it's important that we shouldn't live in the sort of parallel societies that Mrs. Gutu was talking about. And I think the key to changing our society and to living together is education, a point that's made in Clause 7 of the recommendation. It's important that our schools do teach citizenship and that when there are important cultural events for particular communities within each part of our community, that schools should explain those and that we should each come to appreciate, for example, in my area, the Sikh New Year is an important cultural event, and I think it's important that young people should learn about it. But as a member of the Culture Committee, I wanted to support what Mr. Flego was saying, because I do think there's a very important role for the arts, for culture, for dance, for theatre, for sport, in enabling people to come together and to understand one another. And in Hertfordshire, where I come from, we have a festival, Rhythms of the World, which is a music festival, but where each community of very many different kinds has its artists performing. And like Strasbourg last night, every corner has musicians, but it is a good thing because the communities are coming together, understanding each other, and some of the music, when they jam, is actually cross-cultural, and people are hearing African influences in European music, and this is a good thing and something that everybody enjoys. Many of us have seen in the theatre that cross-cultural plays and dance and music, they are the way forward, and they produce most marvellous performances. And it's not just in dance art as well. When Russia and Britain were a little unhappy with one another a year or two ago, the most popular exhibition in London was Russian art. And I think both governments were surprised at how the ordinary people of London had such a thirst for the art of Russia. And these sort of cross-cultural dialogues are very important indeed, and something that this organisation does encourage. And I hope that many people will enjoy the Olympics in London next year, 2012, which again will be an occasion for us all to come together. Finally, I just wanted to make the point that the UK chairman of the Equality and Human Rights Commission has made it clear recently that he is concerned about the pressure on people of faith, and of all faiths, not simply one faith, and including Christians. And he's made the point that it is fashionable at present to attack religion and that we should all be tolerant, and I agree.
Thank you, sir, for your expose. Now I must interrupt. Sorry, to the debate, and the debate will be continued this afternoon after the debate on reform of the Parliamentary Assembly.
That concludes the list of our speakers. I call Mr. Toshev, the rapporteur, to reply. You have 2 minutes and 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I should not miss the opportunity to express my gratitude to the Secretariat of the Political Affairs Committee, namely Mr. João Ari and Despina Hadji Vasilio, and also the secretaries of the other committees who actively contributed for preparation of this common paper. Also, I would like to express my gratitude to the Secretary General of the Assembly, Mr. Savitsky, for facilitating this process. I think it is very important that we could present our point of view before the Committee of Ministers, which is going to consider also the paper of Eminent Persons Group, and this is important, the voice of the Assembly to be heard. I am grateful for all those who took part in this debate and contributed sincerely to the, to the debate, which is of great importance. I have not time enough to answer to anyone and the points which have been raised during the debate, but first of all I would like to say in respect of the remarks of Mr. Gross that the intercultural approach is not substituting multiculturalism but complementing. This is additional measures, and we propose additional measures how to improve the situation where it is not working well. Concerning the speech of Lord Tomlinson, I would like to say that he addressed mainly the report of eminent persons, and I didn't heard much criticism on the report of the Political Affairs Committee presented to me today, and we should not mix these two papers. They are different. Concerning the remarks of Mr. Morio, which are remarks which I would like to address. First of all, the question of race is used only in context of European Commission against racism and intolerance and hate speeches on racial or ethnic or xenophobic base, and this was the situation as it is described in point 14.3 of the draft recommendation. I'm not speaking anything about the abortion because I think this is beyond the scope of this report, but the text about family supporting policy means to support families with children, to support women who are in maternity, etc. This I meant when I spoke about family supporting policy in order to fight aging of European population. And I think, thank you, I wanted more time to reply for all these remarks, but may I, in the end, express my gratitude for all those who contributed for preparation of our paper, and I hope our voice will be heard in the Committee of Ministers too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toshev.